The Cambridge Analytica scandal lingers on for Meta. Waymo will test its driverless cars in Tokyo next year. And NASA's new Webb telescope images support previously controversial findings about how planets formed. It's Tuesday, December 17th, and this is Engadget News. The stench of Cambridge Analytica is still hovering over Facebook as parent Meta just agreed to pay 311,000 Australian users the Australian equivalent of $31.7 million over the scandal. The settlement with the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner comes after a 4-year dispute with Meta and follows a $725 million award in the U.S., along with payouts in the U.K. and elsewhere. Cambridge Analytica, now defunct, accessed the personal data of Australian users by an app and used the information gathered to target individuals with personally tailored messages. The scandal was exposed by the New York Times and The Guardian back in 2018, thanks in large part to whistleblower Christopher Wiley. Though the app was only downloaded by a small number of users, it also accessed the data of their friends, affecting 311,000 people. Meta will be required to set up a payment system run by a third-party administrator starting early next year. Lesser payments will be issued to people who've experienced generalized concern or embarrassment, with higher sums meted out to those who can demonstrate that they suffered loss or damage. Anyone affected should be able to apply mid-2025. In a statement, Meta displayed no contrition and said the settlement was more or less a business decision. The case took 4 years to resolve, largely because Meta claimed it wasn't technically doing business in Australia. But that argument was finally slapped aside by the nation's highest court. Waymo will deploy its driverless cars in Japan, marking the first time it will test its technology in another country. According to CNBC, the company will begin testing its Jaguar I-Pace vehicles in Tokyo early next year and expects to remain in the country for an extended period. Now, during the vehicle's experimental phase, which will last for several quarters, human drivers from a Japanese taxi company will operate Waymo's cars so that its technology can map the city. Particularly, they're driving Waymo's Jaguar I-Paces through the streets of Tokyo. The data gathered from those tests will then be used to train the company's self-driving system. Waymo will also be recreating Tokyo's driving conditions in a closed course in the U.S., where it will put more of its robo-taxis to the test and will be using data collected from that effort for training. The company has yet to announce when it will open rides to the public, but it has already formed a partnership with Japan's Go taxi app, which will presumably offer driverless rides to users in the future. As CNBC noted, Japan is keen to introduce driverless rides as a transportation option, despite its efficient train system due to its aging population. Last year, it amended its laws to allow Level 4 autonomous driving on its roads. In the U.S., Waymo operates its driverless cars in Phoenix, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. It announced several plans to introduce its vehicles to more locations over the next few years and raised $5.6 billion to fund its expansion to Austin and Atlanta. Waymo will also be deploying its Jaguar I-Pace vehicles in Miami early next year and will offer rides to the public in the city sometime in 2026. NASA says it was able to use the James Webb telescope to capture images of planet-forming disks around ancient stars that challenge theoretical models of how planets can form. The images support earlier findings from the Hubble telescope that have not been able to be confirmed until now. The new Webb highly detailed images were captured from the Small Magellanic Cloud, a neighboring dwarf galaxy. The Webb telescope was specifically focused on a cluster called NGC 346, which NASA says is a good proxy for similar conditions in the early, distant universe, and which lacks the heavier elements that have traditionally been connected to planet formation. Webb was able to capture a spectra of light which suggests protoplanetary disks are still hanging out around those stars, going against previous expectations that they would have blown away in a few million years. Without much detailed evidence, the idea was controversial. The Webb telescope was able to fill in those details, though, suggesting the disks in our neighboring galaxies have a much longer period of time to collect the dust and gas that forms the basis of a new planet. As to why those disks are able to persist in the first place, NASA says researchers have two possible theories. One is that the radiation pressure expelled from stars in NGC 346 just takes longer to dissipate planet-forming disks. The other is that the large gas cloud that's necessary to form a sun-like star in an environment with fewer heavy elements would naturally produce larger disks that take longer to fade away. Whichever theory proves correct, the new images are beautiful evidence that we still do not have a full grasp of how planets are formed. Thanks for listening. There's more to these stories and additional articles at Engadget.com. This episode featured journalism from Carissa Bell, Mariella Moon, and Ian Carlos Campbell, and was voiced and produced from the sound studios of Spoken Layer. Enjoy your day, and I'll be back tomorrow with more tech news from Engadget.